This session will showcase how global agencies such as the World Bank Group and other public and private organizations are promoting climate-smart investments by addressing the opportunities and constraints in various developing countries. This discussion will also highlight the need to explore innovative ways in which various private sector finance can be catalyzed for NDCs. Today, we are honored to have among us Dr. Carsten Sark, Director General, BMU, Germany. Dr. Sark heads the Climate Policy, European and International Policy at the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety in Germany. Before he assumed that office in 2016, he led the sub-department European and International Policies for 12 years. Since 1999, Dr. Sark is the German chief negotiator at the UNFCCC conferences of the parties. We welcome you, sir. On our panel today, we have Ms. Neha Mukhi, Senior Specialist, Energy and Climate Change, the World Bank Group, Ms. Aditi Maheshwari, Senior Operations Officer, International Finance Corporation, Ms. Rajshri Ray, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, Dr. Venkat Putti, Program Manager, Climate and Carbon Finance Unit, the World Bank Group, Dr. Monty Giriana, Deputy Minister for Energy, Natural Resources and Environment, Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, Indonesia, and finally, Dr. Kentaro Tamura, Research Leader, Institute for Global Environment Strategies, Japan. May I now request the panel to please come up on the dais for this session. Over to you, sir.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you very much for hosting us here today. I see that we have to meet our promise, and I'm delighted to chair this session here today. Even though I missed the first part of this work track in the morning, I'm sure you concluded that we need to be more ambitious with our commitments and on climate action, especially in this context. It is of utmost importance to direct more investments toward climate action. I think there is a broad consensus that the magnitude of finance needed to achieve the Paris climate targets will not be delivered by the $100 billion US climate finance alone. Public, international finance will continue to play an important facilitating role, especially in de-risking investments in developing countries, and as means to mobilize private capital in low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure as well for adaptation and capacity building aspects. The significant investment needs to be embedded in the NDCs, which will have to be mobilized and quickly and effectively channeled into climate-related initiatives. Financing the implementation of NDCs is a costly and long-term endeavor. Against this background, it's obvious that countries seeking to embark on a low-carbon, climate-resilient development path will require funding from a variety of sources. But how can we align financial flows with low-carbon and resilient development pathways? Let me focus on 4 points, and later on you will hear different perspectives at the brink between public and private sector. First, many countries currently lack capacities and funding for putting NDCs into practice. Thus, we need a comprehensive strategy to mobilize climate finance and make it accessible. This is one of the missing links in moving from planning climate action to implementation. It is clear that no single financing source will be able to cover national costs of NDC implementation. Mobilizing public and private resources is an essential part of finance climate measures. Public finance institutions, banks, institutional investors, corporations, and capital markets all have a crucial role to play. And governments have to set the right incentives to mobilize finance away from emissions-intensive projects. Second, most of us realized after submitting our NDCs in 2015 that their implementation is rather complex and requires a massive buy-in not only from environment ministries or climate ministries, but from the whole government and its line ministries, as well as the concrete investment plans that are able to juggle the different instruments and sources available, from public to private, national to international. There's a recent IRENA study where we clearly see that the energy plans are much more ambitious than the climate strategies the same governments delivered. And so that tells you very clearly that we need to link up better with the line ministries. In theory, we know what makes an NDC a decent investment plan. They are, for example, fully aligned with the national development planning priorities. They are embedded in conducive investment policies. They are underpinned by considerations how projects will be funded and financed. So they should not be just wish lists, but they should be operationalized. Countries now need certainty on the way to achieve their NDCs. They need to proceed with the workout of their NDCs, build their low-emission development strategies, and define the entry points for international cooperation. This should provide clear signals to the public and private sector. Third, but only with a good understanding of current climate finance flows and the instrument mix at hand to influence the investment environment, more investments will flow into sectors and measures relevant to achieve the needed transitions as laid out in the NDCs. While some countries embed a green economy concept in their national development strategies and plans, we often experience a disconnect between climate and broader development and growth objectives and policies, let alone the private sectors. So it is important to align priorities set by climate ministries and to mobilize and facilitate finance for transformation. A large share of businesses still lack awareness on climate change-related risk and thus do not consider these risks in corporate risk management schemes. And that's probably totally different from what the economic elites tell you, because if you look at the latest risk report of the World Economic Forum, the environment and planetary boundary challenges rank 1 in the business community. If I hear the debates in many countries, including my own, more short-term issues are in first ranks in policies. So there is a big gap which we need to fill. Fourth, in the last years, the International Climate Initiative of our ministry has focused on technical assistance for the development of enabling environments such as carbon markets, MRV systems, sectoral mitigation strategies, as well as building capacities to access international funds. For example, carbon market mechanisms are expected to contribute substantially to achieve a greenhouse gas emission pathway towards the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement. And we have the Carbon Leadership Forum at the end of the week, back-to-back to this summit here on Thursday and Friday. Therefore, I suggest let us discuss and think about how markets can deliver additional emission reductions and support the conditional part of the NDCs. We increasingly need to work also with ministries of finance and financial institutions. Let me conclude. I very much welcome the steady growth of the NDC partnership and see a huge appetite by countries to learn from each other and to share their experiences. Now, after a better understanding of how NDCs can look like, the financing questions move more and more to the center of the debate. In the NDC partnership, a partnership founded in Marrakesh the year after the Paris Agreement was signed, we are working with donor countries to avoid overlaps, to align our funding portfolios with the NDCs and partnership plans of partner countries. And just there is a support facility sitting in the World Bank, and then Qatar, inter alia, will talk about that later on. So I look forward to discuss with you on key barriers and challenges which you face here in India in particular, but in other countries as well, and about best practice and what needs to be done. So our speakers have already been just introduced shortly, and we will be just getting practical insights from the NDC Support Partnership Facility with the World Bank by Nia, I think. Starting at the very beginning, we will be learning on lessons from the IFC on crowding in private capital by Aditi. We'll learn about the specific challenges and opportunity in India by Rajari from the government of India. Colleagues of my ministry met you during your last visit in November, and I'm happy that we now get the chance to meet as well. And then furthermore, Venkata Putti from the World Bank will outline his experience with result-based financing instruments. And last but not least, we will hear on 2 country experiences. Dr. Monty Giriana from the Ministry of Environment of Indonesia and Kantaro Tamura from IGs in Japan will share their insights. And so, Nia, would you like to start, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Neha Mukhi with the World Bank, and today I'll be talking about the NDC support facility that's helping and working with countries and partners to scale up action in order to support implementation of NDCs towards the Paris Agreement goals. Just a quick overview, I'm going to talk a little bit about just the background on the NDC cycle, Paris Agreement, a little bit about the NDC partnership, then more specifically about this NDC support facility and the climate action peer exchange and how the World Bank is engaging directly with countries through the support provided by the facility. Now, the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, these global political agreements provided a robust framework to integrate climate change and development with the idea that they created an enabling framework for policy actions and packages that would help scale up implementation of climate action. And if we think about it, climate and sustainable development goals are inherently linked. And these links are very important to acknowledge and internalize if we are to be strategic about financing towards low emissions and climate resilience development. Further, if we think about the changes that need to happen for the scale of climate action that needs to be implemented, it requires a level of transformational change which is very different from the incremental efforts that we've typically been talking about. So we're talking about system-level changes that not only impact just the outcomes, but the overall production and consumption patterns, because the incremental efforts, as we know currently, the NDCs together don't add up to our collective goal of the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees Celsius, less than 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius by second half of the century. So this slide provides a quick overview of the NDC update cycle. Pretty much, I'm sure everybody in the room is fully aware of it. Key milestones to keep in mind are the second NDC update, which would be around at COP26 in 2020, and the countries are now gearing up towards reviewing their current commitments under the NDC and under their current NDCs. Now, I think the recent IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius already emphasized and reinforced the need for speed and urgency of climate action if we are to even think about meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, which from a 2050 timeline, if we are to translate it to a more near-term objective, that's about 40% reductions by 2030. So with all that in mind, I think there is acknowledgement around that the national climate action needs to be fast, effective, and ambitious. However, countries are also looking towards more support to scale up climate action in order to move beyond their unconditional commitments into the conditional target areas. And this is where the global NDC partnership has been very instrumental in facilitating learning and collaboration across countries and partner organizations, both international organizations and non-state actors, to facilitate knowledge exchange, technical assistance and capacity building, to kind of match the demand and supply of technical assistance in specific areas across sectors, across the member countries. It has helped increase political momentum for Paris implementation and has brought in more greater alignment between the climate and development goals towards more transformational climate policies. So who is part of the partnership? The partnership is inclusive and open to countries and organizations and institutions. It includes currently about 83 countries and about 19 organizations. The members essentially support the guiding principles, and they share activities and approaches. They go beyond go beyond the business as usual. Currently, the partnership is co-chaired by Netherlands and Costa Rica. The World Bank Group is one of the implementing institutions of the partnership. Now, moving more specifically on, talking more specifically on what the World Bank is doing in terms of climate change action and the NDCs to support NDC implementation. As part of the Climate Change Action Plan for the period of 2016 to 20, the World Bank Group has emphasized focus on translating NDCs into investment plans, working with partners for more innovative financing packages that actually respond to client country demands. And also, it has worked towards creating a one-stop shop in terms of the NDC platform that puts together information on climate impacts, NDCs, and climate finance, and analytical tools and methods that are accessible on the web for the countries. Moving forward, now, in support of the NDC partnership, the NDC support facility was set up at the World Bank Group. It's a World Bank executed multi-donor trust fund that was created in 2016 to support NDC implementation. Currently, the main funding for the trust fund is coming from the German government, and that has helped mobilize a lot of significant efforts on climate action across sectors. The support facility helps with facilitating implementation in support of the partnership countries. Essentially, the partnership countries are able to participate and access the resources available through the support facility. The World Bank Group is one of the representatives on the NDC Partnership Steering Committee. It represents the MDBs on the committee. This is a quick snapshot of the country engagements that are currently underway through funding from the support facility. So there are about 26 projects in 18 countries spread around the globe. And it covers, the engagement across countries covers pretty much all of the major emitting sectors across various themes on implementation strategy, on investment and business planning, scaling up private sector engagement, enhancing and encouraging more cross-sectoral coordination, providing support on upstream climate analytics to inform investment planning for the NDCs, and also creating and supporting systems for monitoring, reporting, and verification. One thing that I would like to highlight here is one of the sectors listed here is macroeconomics, trade, and investments. This has been one of the increased emphasis lately with a common understanding that action in each of the sectors requires more of the upstream fiscal planning and budgetary allocations to facilitate sector-level action. So therefore, it's important to engage the finance ministries early on to engage them in a climate-informed development and development priorities dialogue for the country. To that end, as part of the support facility, the Climate Action Peer Exchange, the CAPE Forum, was launched for the finance ministers. It is a knowledge forum that was established at COP22. It's hosted by the World Bank Group, and it helps to facilitate dialogue among the finance ministries to discuss what are the challenges that they face in terms of integrating climate priorities and climate considerations in their own budget plans, in their sector planning, and what kind of tools and review approaches are needed for them to plan their budgets and their finances for their financial planning cycles. So under this forum, we're working with several technical partners, and the range of work under here includes analytical work that is delivered in partnership with the World Bank Group, and direct in-country support, for example, recent work in Uganda for climate budgeting and expenditure review, in Dominica for fiscal and macro risk resilience studies, and several capacity building workshops have been organized recently in the Caribbean and in the Middle East a little while ago to facilitate dialogue among finance ministries on how to integrate climate priorities in their fiscal planning. This is a quick snapshot of some early outcomes from the transformational projects in several countries. What we're looking at is a range of projects from energy sector to land use management, looking at more of the NDC implementation roadmaps, also looking at more of the macroeconomic pathways for NDC implementation. Based on recent work and the early outcomes, some of the key lessons that have emerged so far include that multi-sector coordination leads to significantly enhanced results in terms of climate outcomes, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And obviously, creating that interministerial coordination has been very beneficial for most countries. Private sector engagement is very important to scale up the level and impact of financing that we're looking for. Creating a more suitable, stable, and conducive political environment with strong institutions has been very helpful. Of course, in some countries, there have been times when climate action has coincided with government changes or elections, and that tends to sometimes slow things down. And finally, financial leverage of the concessional finance or resources going to implement climate action needs to be scaled up in order to make multiple sources of finance contribute towards the climate action. And before concluding, I would say the NDC support facility has been active in outreach efforts as well, putting together a website with resources that's publicly available with fact sheets and blogs from their recent in-country work, and also including information about their upcoming country engagement. And bringing this back to how the World Bank Group is also internalizing this engagement in its way forward. So recently, in 2018, the Bank Group launched its second phase of Climate Action Plan. As we heard earlier this morning in the first session, the World Bank achieved its first set of targets 2 years ahead of time. And they went forward, and we've gone forward and announced the second set of targets, which are applicable for the 2021 to 25 period, going from the previous target of 28% of climate co-benefits further up to 40%, and now focusing a lot more on supporting countries to actually implement and update their NDCs as we get closer to the 2020 milestone, deepening integration on NDC priority actions into and integrating those into the World Bank Group country strategy documents, essentially the country partnership frameworks that create the framework for the next 5 years of bank engagement in the country, focusing more on the long-term strategies, the mid-century and longer-term strategies towards net decarbonization aligned with the Paris goals. And then finally, collaboration with the NDC partnership and other partners, and hopefully expanding the partnership for wider interaction and engagement. With that, I'll conclude here some contact information for the focal points, and I'll turn it over to our colleague next.
Thank you, Nia, and thank you for just pointing out how you, the World Bank, are supporting the NDC partnership, but UNDP or UNEP are doing likewise. So it's you saw 28 countries here, but you have more opportunities to engage, and also thank you very much for highlighting the opportunities. The third but last slide also showed the challenges of a whole of government approach, and probably that's something for discussion later on, because if you do that with partners, you see all the challenges. But one important instrument, for me at least, is always that you get a more strategic long-term planning and then backcast what does it mean for your structures and investments today. And I saw it on your last slide. Thank you for that one. Now we come just more from the capacity building angle and planning angle to the International Finance Corporation, mobilizing the private sector. And Aditi, you have been working for 15 years now on trying to mobilize climate action within the private sector. Please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sachs. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to talk briefly about IFC and its role in climate change in the context of the global action more broadly by the private sector, and discuss a new approach that we have been taking to upstream engagement on climate change that is supporting long-term pipeline development and creating the enabling conditions to attract private investment. And we think that this approach can be replicated. So for more than 60 years, IFC has been a leader in private sector development, and climate change is a core strategic priority as we are entering into sort of the IFC 3.0 phase, which is looking at creating a new strategic framework, focusing on creating markets and maximizing impact for long-term sustainable development. We're focusing on 5 core markets through which we intend to scale climate action. And across all these markets, we're looking to incorporate energy efficiency and disruptive technologies across all projects to maximize impact. And in the context of this effort, we have seen that we surpassed our own 2020 goal in the past financial year, with achieving 34% of our own account investments in climate-related activities, mobilizing $4.5 billion from other investors. The signal of being able to mobilize that kind of investment from other investors is actually goes to show the broader interest by the private sector to invest in climate-related activities. And they're seeing this as a huge opportunity for engagement in new markets and new technologies and in new business models. This is linked to the Paris effect, the signal sent by the NDCs in terms of the low carbon trajectories that countries are embarking on. But more than that, there's market signals being provided by falling technology prices, such as renewable costs. You're seeing initiatives that are emerging, engaging both large corporations and carbon capital markets. You're seeing new sustainable finance vehicles coming on stream. So there's a lot that is actually helping to push private investment in this space. And investors and companies are not just looking at the climate smart investments, but they're also looking at how to mainstream climate change into their business plans. And this goes back to Carson's point around climate risk and integrating that in. When you look at all of this, you still have to focus on the numbers related to the investment flows so far. And we're seeing CPI did some analysis around the average finance flows over the last several years, and private investment was, I'm sorry, that number is a little out of date, but it was like 270 billion per annum over the last 5-6 years, and it represents about 54% of total climate-related investment per year. 79% of climate finance, so 4/5 of climate finance, stayed within the country in which it originated. And so this highlights the role of how important effective domestic policy making is on targeting investor risks and unlocking investments at scale. So the NDCs were originated in the public sector. They speak a language that is for governments. And we were very keen to make sure that this is translated into what it represents, the actual opportunity for the private sector. And so over the last few years, we've been undertaking analysis around climate investment opportunities. And with the first piece of work that came out in 2016, where we analyzed 21 emerging market countries, and we looked at their NDCs and the specific targets that they've set in key sectors. And this showed, just in these 21 emerging market countries, an investment opportunity of $23 trillion if they were to fully achieve the targets as set out in their NDCs. Want to take this forward, looking from beyond just the theoretical opportunity created by the NDC. We wanted to look at how to help countries increase private investment in a practical way that's tied to the NDCs. And so Côte d'Ivoire was one of the countries that we analyzed in that original analysis. And with funding and support from the NDC support facility, and with extremely robust partnering and championing from the Ministry of Energy, Petroleum and Renewable Energy Development in Côte d'Ivoire, we were able to initiate a process of trying to help them unlock private investment for an opportunity of around $9 billion between now and 2030 to achieve their 42% renewable energy target that they have set. And that's a very ambitious goal, and right now, their power mix is largely gas and hydro, and they wanted to scale this up. So over the last year, we undertook a process of establishing a roadmap, working with stakeholders across the different categories to develop this process. So why Côte d'Ivoire? Well, it has a very solid foundation, supportive institutions, strong policies, ample renewable resource, capacity, and demonstrated interest from the private sector to engage in this space. It has an existing pipeline and a potential of projects already identified. But even with all of that, you're still not seeing investment flowing at the scale necessary. So it's suggested, the country is an excellent candidate for the roadmap process because it's sort of bridging the communication gap between the public and the private sector and actually tackling this challenge jointly. Just to clarify, the $9 billion investment opportunity, we looked at the top two graphs represent the pathways to scale, on the left, the pathways to scale grid-tied renewable energy based on the national plans that have been identified. And then the graph on the right looks at the total capacity and related costs of the identified pipeline of renewable energy projects that Côte d'Ivoire has. So Côte d'Ivoire is looking to scale up both grid-tied renewable energies from solar and wind, hydro and biomass to achieve the 42% renewable energy target. What we did was bring together a variety of stakeholders on a journey, as shown here, and many of them meeting for the very first time, and this whole process was intended to have them coalesce around solutions to the shared challenges that they're facing, and trying to develop a joint vision for how to move forward. This was a 4-step process, and we are now at the point of trying to support Côte d'Ivoire as it moves towards implementing some of the solutions. As you can see from this chart, there is a fairly diverse and healthy ecosystem of stakeholders, both domestic and international, that were brought together in this process. And we convened over 100 stakeholders over a series of over a period of 6 months. And these stakeholders all self-selected into technology-specific working groups. And they met to discuss jointly developing the solutions, agreeing on the common challenges, and then developing solutions over the period of 6 months through structured dialogues, semi-structured dialogues. You will not be able to read this, and this is all in depth, but this is just to illustrate that what we did was, by bringing in international experts and having them showcase solutions that are being deployed elsewhere and the lessons learned, they were able to, the stakeholders within the Côte d'Ivoirian context were able to identify what would be needed and what would work best in the domestic context. And they developed a series of targeted technology-specific solutions which were very much the need as demonstrated by the market. And this roadmap we produced which will be available from the World Bank booth outside. But the roadmap, all these solutions are placed in the roadmap, and there were some common emerging themes that came through as well, which effectively showcase the need for having. There are some significant gaps on data, resource and feasibility studies, the lack of clarity around policy documentation, and lack of information around financing opportunities. The process demonstrated that there are very promising solutions for generating cross-sectoral collaboration on shared challenges, but the lack of information, the lack of supportive, technology-specific, transparent policies, the need for expanding existing tendering processes across other technologies to attract investors, and putting in place the data gaps. So, for example, the last hydropower resource analysis was done in 1979. That data is too old for anyone who is planning a hydropower investment to be able to use as a basis for creating an efficient business plan. So making sure that this kind of information is available and providing that knowledge base to investors was going to be a key way to get project developers to be more active in this space. So from what we've seen, one of the main benefits of this process was to actually create both buy-in and ownership and alignment around the NDC target of 42%. We have seen the Ministry of Energy for the first time to come out and publicly own this target, and it isn't just something that's in the NDC, but this is now something that the Ministry is driving forward. We've seen the private sector become familiar with the national policies and then be able to understand how to plan and their investments and resources around this. The donors are now better able to integrate some of these solutions into existing and future support that they're going to be providing. And so this common alignment around shared challenges and collectively developing the solutions and prioritizing them is something that has actually generated a momentum for continued engagement in this sector, and we're seeing a push from the private sector to develop both an information portal, to have these continued working groups at a technical level to provide interaction between the public sector and the private sector, which was not happening in this space, and the need for an advocacy type organization for the renewable space, which does not exist at the moment in the country. From our perspective, what we've seen is that this is a practical approach to having multiple stakeholders come together and have a consistent and coherent approach on advancing the NDC. And we think this can be replicated in other sectors, in other countries, and because there is no one-size-fits-all approach for engaging with the private sector. So you have to have a targeted discussion on a technology-specific basis where necessary. And we, as IFC, are going to continue to be aligning our upstream engagement on climate in this way to try and get the private sector into the room at an early enough stage to help shape the policies needed and create the enabling conditions needed to scale up investment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. A huge investment opportunity, the need for an institution, a platform which is owned by everybody. So very important lessons and it's not just the example of Côte d'Ivoire. Earlier on, for example, Morocco, one of the key components of the success stories of renewable energies in Morocco was that they founded an agency. First more at the political level, but now to deal with all the technical questions at stake. We were talking a lot about mainstreaming, getting ownership of finance ministries, and so now with Rajashree Ray, we have a representative of the finance ministry of India. Of course, she has been working in other ministries as well on adaptation and a whole range of issues on climate change. She has been a member of the Intergovernmental Committee on Sustainable Development Financing. We met in the GCF, you were in Paris. So, but here you see the finance ministry speaking. Rajashree, please.
Thanks, Carsten. And very good afternoon to all. Since I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, I thought that I can sit here and speak to you. So first of all, let me thank the organizers for giving this opportunity to me. And the topic given to me here is challenges and opportunities in the context of NDC implementation. I believe that I'm a very positive person, so I start with the opportunities part rather than the challenges part of NDC implementation, and maybe a slightly different perspective from what we heard just now. So let me start by just putting the context of the Indian economy. So Indian economy is undergoing economic and social transformation on a larger scale, and I can say that it is happening at a great speed. And so if we look at the opportunities, what are the characteristics of this economy? It is one of the fastest growing major economy in the world, and is expected to be among the top economic powers in the world over the next 10 to 15 years. So there are, it's not that I'm saying like that, there are various reports and various estimates to that. And it's backed by a very strong democracy. So that is the context in which I'm talking. And if we look at the size of the economy, It is the seventh largest economy in the world in nominal GDP terms. And if we look at the purchasing power parity terms, it is the third largest economy in the world. So that is the kind of size of the which we are talking about. And it's growing at around 7+ percent of GDP, and it accounts for almost 17.5, 18% of the population. So that you can look into that size also. And if we trying to look from a private sector perspective, you can look at see the huge market the country provides also because of its size. So it has been very, very, very in terms of India's progress on climate objectives, if we look at it, it has been, I would argue that it has been impressive. And we do have certain philosophy and ethos in our civilization, and how we see the environment, and in what pedestal we keep our environment. So combined with that, India's climate policies or sustainable development policies, through the implementation of various programs and policies which have various components of mitigation and adaptation. If we look at the numbers, the outcomes of that, I would argue again that it has been pretty impressive. And if we look at the emission intensity figures, emission intensity of GDP figures, how we have performed, if we look at the energy intensity of the economy, which has fallen 13%, if I can quote some figures, it has fallen 13% during the period 2012-2017, whereas the G20 average, against that the G20 average was 11%. So it's much, you can argue that it was better. Then, as I said, that emission intensity, I talked about the emission intensity of the economy, but if we look at sector-wise also, industry also, there also you may have a slight variations in the numbers from different reports, but all point to the fact that there has been improvements on that count also. Then if we look at, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, what are the kind of policies and programs which we have in the renewable energy sector, that also has been remarkable. India runs one of the largest renewable energy expansion programs in the world. And even on forest, India is one of the few countries where forests are growing despite tremendous population and livestock pressure. So there also. So all these achievements and outcomes are coming to very specific policies. Of course, it has the important objective is the development of the economy, growth of the economy, but taking into consideration the sustainability of the economy also. Then if I can quote a recent example, that is the National Electric Mobility Mission. I heard that in the last panel there were some discussions on electric vehicles, and also that is there is one program called Faster Adoption and Manufacture of Electric Vehicles under this policy by 2020, which aims at incentivizing and supporting manufacturing ecosystem and early adoption of the electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. There are various discussions going on. Of course, the ministries which are working on that is specifically not finance ministry, but we do take part in those discussions, because at the end of the day, it has to. We will, as an economy, as a government, we need to find resources to implement those. So finance ministry is an integral part of all these discussions. So now coming back to the NDC, of course, everybody in the room here knows about what India's nationally determined contributions are. I don't think I need to elaborate on what exactly are the quantitative targets. It's there in the public domain very much. So what I would say is that, and India's NDCs is by 2030, the economy-wide target which we have put is 33 to 35% emission intensity, reduction in emission intensity of GDP by 2030. So what I would argue is that there comes the kind of policy certainty, because this is the development path, or this is the trajectory in which the economy has to move, or one can argue that this is the direction of travel for the economy. So a low carbon development and climate resilient path. So at the global level, we do have a kind of policy certainty through the Paris Agreement, and at the national level you have that NDC which is in place and which has broadly outlined the path to be followed by 2030. Now coming to the challenges, setting this context, now let me come to the challenges. Challenges, of course, one of the most important challenges will be finding the required amount of resources for achieving these NDC targets by 2030. So we do have some preliminary numbers in the NDC that is being detailed, looked into, and of course, Finance Ministry take these discussions very seriously. We did have a very long meeting just day before yesterday, which our secretary chaired on for this, trying to deliberate on the kind of resources required, which in order to deliver this 2030. So we are detailing those various sectoral targets, various quantitative targets, I would argue, which is there. But then at the same time, since there is an economy-wide wide target there, then there are various other sectors which might not have specifically be mentioned in the NDC, but then we need to look into how various other, for example, how aluminium sector will perform, how steel sector will perform, what is the kind of climate resilient infrastructure which we require. So we did look into, as a preliminary we did look into all these details, and we are basically working the roadmap or strategy for achieving the NDC targets. So there will be some investments which are financially viable. There could be some business, definitely there could be business opportunities while we follow that path, but at the same time there could be some investments which would not be financially viable. Then there could be a chunk of the resources which are required we may be able to meet domestically, but then there will be some amount of resources which will be large enough, which we would not be able to meet domestically. So of course we have not firmed up the number, but we are in the process of looking into those numbers. So when we talk about the barriers, so I just want to give a kind of number. There are some estimates from various reports, so which says that even preliminary estimates, by simply summing the finance needs in NDCs with a conditional component, comes to around $4.4 trillion. So what and India's NDC is also a conditional NDC. It says that international climate public finance is a critical enabler for achieving our NDC. So it again points to, so without sufficient climate finance on the table, the proposed NDCs would not fructify, let alone enhancement of ambitions, because I did see a slide in the earlier presentation also, so at different time, we will have to revisit the NDCs and trying to ratchet up. So but the reality is that the kind of resources for achieving those NDCs, which has already been put on the table by various countries. So that itself is a big challenge, and we have not found a path to find those kind of resources in a meaningful way. So that would remain as a very important challenge which means to find out the adequate resources to achieve those NDC goals. And I would just try to, of course, whatever preliminary estimates are there in the NDCs, I'm sure you all have seen those numbers, which is there in the Indian NDC. But I just want to give a kind of another figure in the Indian economy context. There are some estimates which show that around US $4.5 trillion worth of investments is required by India till 2040 to develop infrastructure to improve economic growth and community well-being. That is it's not in the context of climate change. These figures are, this is in the context of the economic development of the country which we need. So it talks about, I'm talking only about the infrastructures sector here. And it also says that cumulative figure for India's infrastructure investment gap would be around US $526 billion by 2040. So now the point I'm making is that not only is there a need for greater investment in infrastructure in the coming years, but we also need to see that all this, it is necessary that these investments will have to be sustainable in nature also. It's just about the infrastructure development we are talking, but now since we know that we do have a commitment for a low carbon and climate resilient development, we need to ensure that those investments which are yet, those investments and those infrastructure which we would be building or yet to be built will have to be sustainable in nature. So it's an additional kind of challenge which would be coming. So and when it comes to sources, I'll be just finishing in 2 minutes time. When it comes to sources of climate finance, as I argued just now, that international climate finance will be very, very critical. But at the same time, let me put it here that India's climate actions is largely financed from the domestic budgetary resources, and also since the magnitude of resources which we require to implement our NDCs will be substantial in nature, we would argue that all sources of climate finance are important, and international climate finance will be a critical enabler and will be largely financing our climate actions. So far, that is what has been the case. It is through the domestic budgetary resources. We could see a kind of some positive outcome to a certain extent from the last COP, Katowice COP24, which talked about the predictability of finance, international finance required, and it also stated that those resources have to be new and additional, which is a positive outcome. So I would conclude by saying that when we were after the COP21, after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, we could see an unprecedented pace in which the global community acted for ratifying the Paris Agreement. And we could see an unprecedented pace at which it came into force also, because various countries, the required number of countries ratified Paris Agreement. That same momentum in climate finance is also required. I would say that, I would put it in 3 simple words. We need to see scope, scale, and speed. So speed, scale, and scope of climate finance is very important. And we see a lot of scientific reports, including the IPCC reports, which talks about the urgent climate action. We can't wait, we have to start it today. So the kind of urgent climate actions required, we can see the same urgency. While it is laudable, but we need to see the same urgency in climate finance also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajashree, and I think you're absolutely right that when we talk about long-term direction towards low carbon, towards your development vision, you need predictability on finance as well. You said that you have to revisit, I think was your word, NDCs. I think we see it in each and every, because just the headline figures are not the ones, and I think you mentioned renewable energies and forests, for example, where India is by far overshooting its target, and I think you are leading on that one, and I think that to be done with a view on long-term strategy, same we are doing in our countries, I think is important. And you said something important. The driver was not necessarily climate change policies, but your economic development vision, and I think it's an important aspect to frame the issues. Venkata Putti. Venkata, welcome to be home. I learned that you were working at Terry 20 years ago. Ever since he is with the World Bank, the carbon markets team, and Venkata will speak on an important point on results-based financing for climate action.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here, as Carsten said. I spent about 10 years at Terry, including 4 years at the Habitat Center. So this was our stomping ground for many, many years. Thanks. Today, actually, I'm going to speak about the results-based climate finance, which is one of the tools that is available to mobilize climate finance. Essentially, the speakers before me already talked about the magnitude of the requirements, and also IFC actually showed that by converting them into kind of investment opportunities, how we can actually further the climate action. However, obviously, as showed by Rajeshri, who actually told a great story on what India is doing. But even with all the achievements that India has, the challenge still is, very, very substantial. And, obviously there are many dimensions to climate action, but the bottom line is really being able to, provide the financing that is required to achieve all the, goals that we set for, ourselves. So if you look at it from an investment, opportunity perspective, as IFC pointed out, obviously to have those kind of investments, you need to create, what we call the enabling environment, including right kind of policies, regulatory frameworks, technical capacity, etc. And also, finally, given the magnitude of the requirements, as the chair said in his opening remarks, we need all hands on the deck. We need a whole variety of sources of funding, public, private, etc., and also a whole variety of delivery mechanisms for this finance. There are many ways in which these finances could be delivered depending on the specific circumstances. And the results-based financing is one of the tools that are available to do that. And results-based finance is a modality under which funds are disbursed by an investor or donor to a recipient upon the achievement of the pre-agreed set of results, with achievement of these results being subject to independent verification. As we know, over several decades, especially the flow of international, support, the donor support to various developmental projects, clean energy projects, actually has been based on the project proposal in terms of what the project intended to achieve rather than what actually it achieved in the end. So that actually led to a mix of results, and from that experience actually arose this concept of results-based finance, where the payments would be actually made based on the actual achievement of results rather than the potential of a particular program. Of course, carbon finance, you could say, which was pretty, big in the beginning of, the Kyoto Protocol. All carbon finance projects, by definition, could be said to be results-based activities. And so what actually, the results-based financing could do? It's a financial incentive to align the objectives of the principal with the agent, because there are donors who are interested in pushing particular objectives of sustainability and so on, and then obviously the people who are trying to develop these clean projects, sustainable projects. So this is a mechanism to align the interests of both parties. and the shifting of the risk of non-delivery of results from the principal to the agent. If the donor has given money to achieve a certain result, but if it wasn't achieved, then obviously that investment was lost in the earlier scheme of things. But now with the agent who is implementing the program taking on the responsibility, we essentially are eliminating the risk of project failure. And RBF can support the structural change leading to long-term delivery of results depending on the sectors that you are dealing with. And it can also be delivered through different financial instruments. It could be grants, loans, or risk mitigation instruments. There are examples from all over the world on all types of financial instruments that could be used through RBF. And it could be a standalone modality, or it could also be combined with upfront financing. And it's flexible to target specific or multiple actors. There are projects which include both government agencies, implementing agencies, private sector entities, NGOs, etc. So it is a flexible mechanism that is focused on results rather than the process. So the World Bank, as many of you know, has been actually promoting various climate funding instruments, and results-based financing is one of them. In fact, since the advent of Kyoto Protocol, World Bank has handled nearly $6 billion worth of programs focusing on carbon markets, carbon finance, and the results-based financing is one of those mechanisms. And there are two programs that I wanted to highlight of this. One is what is called the CDEV, the Carbon Initiative for Development. And the CDEV is a World Bank trust fund that mobilizes private finance for clean energy access to low-income countries. One specific characteristic of CDEV is the use of money to further energy access. Because using climate funds to promote energy access has not been very prominent in many countries, but this is one program that actually aims to do that, and it actually has a number of programs, projects around, especially in Africa, the low-income countries, focusing on energy access, rural electrification, using renewable energy, clean cook stove programs, etc. And it delivers results-based finance in innovative, transformative business models driven by the private sector. There is this very good example in Rwanda where we are actually working with Indian Dairy, one of the private sector groups, and to promote clean cook stoves. And recently there has been an article on this in the New York Times highlighting how this model has been very successfully implemented in Rwanda. And so by applying this results-based approach, CDEV helps streamline private finance to power business growth. And the other fund that we have on results-based finance is the Biocarbon Fund. And with these two funds, I think we have about $500 million under implementation for results-based activities. This program is currently implemented in Colombia, Ethiopia, Mexico, Indonesia, and Zambia with about $340 million. And I'll quickly show you one example of Ethiopia where they're actually working on a forested landscape program. And it's called Oromia in Ethiopia. And this project actually is a very large-scale project that covers 32 million hectares, of which 9 million hectares are the forests. And these actually represent over 50% of the total forests that are in Ethiopia. And it also covers key commodities and sectors: coffee, livestock, dairy, subsistence, agriculture. And it has a number of different activities interlinked that enable investments and enable sustainable activities. It also has an IFC component, and it has actually a partnership with Nespresso, one of the coffee companies from Europe, I think. and it actually covers about, it already kind of trained about 20,000 land users in sustainable practices. It's also implementing a pilot program for fast-based private sector businesses in Oromia, and it also works with several NGOs, and it actually has also linked with various international organizations to leverage their expertise. So, this is a typical example of RBF that actually contributes to various aspects of, promoting climate finance. So it, helps promote policies and best practices. It actually shows how public-private partnerships can actually be, effective in pushing these programs, and also it actually works on the basis of results. So, and it of course also has the emission reduction component, and the payments are made on the basis of emission reductions actually achieved. So it actually, addresses several issues, several aspects of mobilizing and investing sustainable finance. So, thank you.
Thank you, Venkata, for showing that example, and I think through the SciDev, which we are investing in, you clearly see that you help de-risking early stages, and you provide a platform for the private sector to be engaged as well, but it's a complex structure. It reminds me of the very first one, but these things are complex, and therefore I think congratulations to what you're doing there. Now, finally, we hear two country experiences on carbon pricing. First, from the Deputy Minister for Energy, Natural Resources and Environment of Indonesia, Dr. Monty Giriana, and he was working on these kind of issues, how to transform your growth models just in many sectors, including with the Green Growth Institute. So, Monty, please.
Thank you, Carsten. Our commitment to achieve the target of Paris Agreement is reflected in the law that we have developed and then endorsed by 2016 law on the ratifications of the Paris Agreements, and we will attain unconditional 29% emission reduction and 41% conditional reduction from business as usual by 2030. I think that's very much clear. And last year, 2016, we have achieved 14% emission reductions, and we have spent almost $5.8 billion in a number of mitigation actions and using budget tagging approach. And this reduction is about 250 million ton carbon dioxide equivalent. And we have also issued the first sovereign green bond as much as $1.25 billion, where all of the proceeds was being used to finance all green projects. We have also enforced moratoria on peatland, forest opening, as well as on palm oil plantations. And since last year, we have substituted almost 20% of fossil fuel-based gas oil under the mandatory B20 biodiesel program. And this year, we are going to have a target of 6 million kiloliter biodiesel, and we are expecting to have close to 9 million reduction emission carbon dioxide equivalent by the end of this year. In addition, we have implemented incentive and disincentive mechanism to leverage public-private participation. We have submitted more than 200 projects in clean development mechanisms, and close to 150 being registered. We have participated in verified carbon standard VCS for more than 15 projects, and we have also utilized joint crediting mechanism with the Japanese government, close to 35 projects. From now on, we are trying to, under the support of the World Bank, we are trying to develop market-based instruments that we are considering to be implemented in the near future. There are 4 types of instruments. The first one is what we call it emission cap and trade system, energy efficiency certificate, emission tax rebate system, and the last one is the carbon offsetting mechanism. And this is going to be implemented within two major sectors, power sectors, electricity, and the industry sectors. We thought that we have sufficient legal basis for the implementation of these market-based instruments. We have law on the environmental protection management 2009 and set up the obligation for the central government and local government to develop and to apply environmental economic instrument to preserve the environment. And also by 2014, we endorsed law on industry and also setting up the green industrial standard to serve as guideline for the standardizations of targeted industry. Following the laws, we have endorsed a number of government regulations, a number of minister decrees. One of the most important regulation is that regulation on economic instrument for environment, which has been defined last year, which very much set the framework for the establishment of the emission cap and tax system. Green industry standard also has been set up for a number of targeted industries such as Portland, cement industry, ceramic industry, pulp and paper, textile, milk processing industry, fertilizers, and rubber industries. A certificate for energy efficiency will be applied to power sectors and Portland cement, fertilizer, pulp, paper, and textile. Certificate is given to those whose energy consumption is less than the prescribed standard. For those whose energy consumption is more than the standard, then they can either purchase or the certificate or being imposed by a penalty. But that's the idea. However, what we have seen in the country is that we don't have sufficient platform yet. We need to develop a platform as well as the institutional arrangement for trading, operation, and for ensuring compliance and oversight. We need to develop a detailed MRV system and accreditation of auditors to serve as validators and verifiers. On the idea of applying emission tax rebate system, we seem to be having difficulties because introduction of a new tax system in the form of direct carbon tax is very challenging in terms of its development, in terms of the approval process, because you have to go to the parliament. And also in addition to that, the carbon tax being perceived as the new tax, and then at the end will face heavy resistance from the industries because they thought it's going to be the additional financial burden to the industries. On the carbon offsetting scheme, we do have experience in participating in CDM, FCS, and GCM, but it seems to be this experience seems to be not sufficient for implementations of the carbon offsetting scheme. We need to develop again the same thing like the other one on the energy efficiency certificate. We need to have a platform to oversight and to manage the offsetting the trading. What we thought is that we have to develop tools to define eligible mitigation project, to design project registration system, and also to design the tools for the issuance of emission reduction unit for accreditation of third-party entities to assess the project. And again, at the end, of course, we need to enhance our MRV system in such way to be more robust and effective way for verification. Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. You're showing that you are just implementing or assessing a whole variety of economic instruments, and I can understand that. I think on carbon taxes, we seem to face a worldwide dilemma. Those countries who have introduced carbon taxes are seeing very positive benefits. If you just have a wise expenditure of the revenues, and you see how that could spur your development. However, Having said that, while you want to introduce carbon taxes, it's fought against these introduction in nearly all countries of the world, and therefore getting the revenue spending more related to economic development and to social aspects, for me, is absolutely a key factor, because you need to win the hearts in order to make such kind of decisions. But if we are talking about a more resource or carbon restrained world, just setting the prices right is probably one of the key issues. And you were saying what challenges you see in Indonesia. I can tell you that I have the same debate for the non-ETS sector right now in Germany. And so winning these political battles is important. And if we could share good practice, I think it's most important. Dr. Kentaro Tomura, last but not least, he is from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, the think tank in Japan, just advising the government on environmental policies. And you gained your doctorate in London School of Economics, and working on carbon pricing and instruments like this as well. Kentaro, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like briefly share some experience in Japan in terms of using carbon pricing for the mobilizing climate finance. So I think already just mentioned, there are two roles the carbon pricing can play in terms of mobilizing climate finance. First one is the revenue, to include revenue for public finance. The second one is kind of price signal. So I'd like to share some experience of Japan in each case. First one is the carbon tax. In Japan, carbon tax was introduced in 2012. But the carbon tax rate is rather moderate, only at around 289 Japanese yen per ton. That means around 2.6 US dollar per ton, CO2 ton. So that's but rather low. But its total revenue amount to around 262 billion Japanese yen. That means around 2.3 billion US dollar. So no, that's so small. So and this revenue are used for only for the mitigation related to emission from energy sources, domestically and also internationally. So this revenue are actually used for that financing JCM project, joint crediting mechanism. This is a kind of financial scheme for low carbon technology deployment in developing countries. And because of this kind of stable and predictable resources, our financial resources from carbon tax, Japanese government could commit to using this revenue for JCM project, and then by 2030, through JCM project, they are intended to reduce emission around from 50 to 100 million CO2 ton by 2030. So this is one example of how to utilize this carbon revenue. So the other one is pricing effect. Actually, from that point of view, the experience of metropolitan government of Tokyo is interesting. They introduced a local cap and trade system in 2010. So then actually they achieved 26% reduction against base year. This reduction is much profound than national average. So what's interesting is that not only this amount of emission, but also it was observed that actually business and the private facilities, which are covered by this emission trading scheme, they redirected or make more investment in more efficient device and services. And actually, the questionnaire survey conducted by this the government, metropolitan government of Tokyo, showed that before, initially, this emission reduction at the facility level is the matter of the on-site or ground level responsibility. But after the introduction of this mandatory cap and trade, it became matter of top management responsibility. Then they changed some business plan and also redirected more finance toward this low carbon technology, especially this highly efficient air conditioning and also lighting system and so on. So this is another good example how the government can mobilize this finance, private finance through this policy tool. And also, finally, I'd like to share is one, briefly explain why Metropolitan Tokyo was able to introduce this local cap and trade. This is interesting, especially if you consider that fact in Japan, the previous effort to introduce national level emission trading were failed, mainly because of the strong opposition from business sector. But of course, when this metropolitan government of Tokyo proposed to introduce this local cap and trade system, they also faced strong opposition from the business sector. But they took more than 2 years for kind of preparatory period. During that period, they worked with private entity to identify their emission reduction potential, providing some technical assistance and assistance. And because of this collaborative period, collaborative approach, the private entity got more of confidence, and they finally agreed upon this introduction of this mandatory cap and trade scheme. So this, I think, this story could be one lesson which we can learn from this experience of Tokyo. Thank you very much.
Kento, thank you very much, because that illustrates very well what I was just trying to explain earlier on. It needs some political vision, but you need to be careful, define your messages very well, and have an upfront process which is real participation and collaboration, and not just something where you it's a process where you create ownership and just take away lots of the fears, and rushed introduction normally does not work, and I think it is a very good example, and I very much see the leadership of the metropolitan region of Tokyo, and for some years I was a persona non grata in Keidan Ren, because when I was just on that issues, and I had that for many, many years. So we are running a little bit behind, but I think we have some more 10, max 15 minutes, and I would like to open it up. So please give us very precise questions, not another statement. We had statements, and please tell to whom you direct the question, because if you just take all the 7 of us, we will be lost here. Yes, please.
My name is Arvind Padi. I'm the country director for ICRISAT, an International Crops Research Institute. My question is to Madam Rajashri Ray. In fact, when we are sensitizing on climate smart policies, it is at the higher level. But to my mind, if we sensitize the street level policymakers, like in Indian context, the Sarpanch or the Panchayat Samiti officials, maybe we could leverage more funds. For example, the NREGS, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. This year itself, there is a provision of 60,000 crores. That is about $8 to $9 billion. So if we can leverage such funds to go for actions on climate smart in the ground, that would be very useful.
I'm looking for 2 or 3 more questions, and then I direct it, because otherwise, yes, please, the gentleman there in the back.
Good afternoon. I'm Jaikumar Gaurav. I work with the German Development Agency in Delhi. My question is to Venkat from World Bank. How do you see the developers or project implementers mobilize the first initial capital when we talk about results-based financing? Because it's a disadvantage to those who don't have initial capital to start working on a results-based financing model. And if there are any examples of how IFC or World Bank has helped cover the cost of financing also. Because even if I have achieved the results, over a period of time I've invested the money and then there's a cost of capital that I have to bear in addition to the initial capital that I invested. So what are your thoughts on that? Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a third question? No, it's not the case. Then we start with you, Rajasri. How do we bring your clever strategies down to earth and just implement it? So just put it very blunt.
Anyway, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
Like the Paris Agreement, it has a lot of bottom-up approaches, bottom-up elements, and it's very important to have bottom-up elements. So at the national level also, in the domestic climate policy framework also, that needs to be, so I totally take your point. When it comes to the national level climate policy or the domestic climate policy framework, of course at subnational level and further down, it has an important role to play, and that has been recognized. If we look back to the National Action Plan on Climate Change, it has been recognized that subsequent to that, we did have a large amount of consultations with the state governments, and more than 30 state action plans on climate change are on the table. Some of them are in draft stages, but then the point is that all those subnational governments at the state level, they have come forward and they do have something called on the table, state action plans on climate change. And your example, I really like that example because you specifically mentioned about Manarega, and it's basically an adaptation. So of course one can think about mitigation at the global level, but when it comes to adaptation, it has to be at the local level. So it's basically the local actors. So all actors have an important role in various dimensions of addressing the climate change, and especially in the case of adaptation, it has to be at the local level, and that process is there. And of course you brought the example and how to leverage resources and pull it together and all. So those things are definitely factored in the discussions, and going forward when we have further detail these actions, that will have definitely a very important role. Even in the very important discussions which we had 2 days back, these issues came up, and it has been factored in the discussion. So I want to assure you like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Venkata, please. How do you mobilize the first capital?
Yeah. Thanks. I think that has definitely been an issue when the RBF came through as a concept, and I think people learned from the experiences. So I think in many of the RBF projects now there is a routine provision for upfront payments, and obviously the conditions under which the upfront payments are made vary from country to country, I mean the project to project, sector to sector, but that definitely is, I think, available in most of the RBF projects. As far as the cost of capital is concerned, yeah, that's obviously linked to the time element, the delays in the projects and so on, but it will have to be, part of the, project design and, effective, monitoring. I'm not aware of any examples, midway through the project you actually create a provision for taking care of cost of capital, but it has to be part of the design.
Thank you. I would argue that sometimes it's much more difficult to get the second and third because you have some donors who are very much interested in moving pilots forward on having public-private partnerships, and we are one of them. But of course, Rajasri mentioned earlier on, these new financing models need to be sustainable on the financial terms, and therefore just coming through the valley of death then and just to making it bigger instruments is probably even more important in times where everybody wants to be new and just exciting in the very first phase. And of course, then you need an institution like the World Bank to driving these issues forward. But even better, and that's the story we learned from Côte d'Ivoire or just from Morocco or from India when you have national institutions moving things forward. So my final ask to all of you would be one sentence each of what surprised you, or what is your mission, or what did you learn today, or what do you consider most important. Nia, you had the least chance, but therefore it's open. Just one sentence each. Yes.
I think one thing that was most interesting for me to hear from our country representatives was there's a lot of work that's going on in the countries that's not necessarily being that's not necessarily always visible or being shared enough. So I think we need to create a more of knowledge sharing, practice sharing community to make it more widely shared, and also to address those challenges that might be common across each other's issues, and in case of matching development priorities with climate objectives.
Thank you. It was one very elaborate sentence and one clear message. Knowledge platforms, knowledge sharing. Aditi, please.
I think one of the interesting things from the country examples was about the general pushback that everyone gets initially from industry, and then the various different approaches and tactics being used to generate buy-in and ownership and build the momentum for having the private sector and industry take part in these processes. So the example in Japan was very interesting about doing the legwork up front to make sure that you don't get pushback later.
Thank you. Rajashree.
Very briefly, my take from this conversation is that what I feel here is that all important actors, all important stakeholders are on board to discuss the climate and sustainable development issues. So it's not limited to some corridors of government buildings, or limited to a few think tanks. I think all stakeholders are on board and they see an opportunity to take the climate discussions forward. So I think together we will definitely be able to achieve something good. Thank you.
Thank you. Venkata.
Thank you. In the World Bank, we are not used to coming up with just one sentence, but I'll try. Yeah, I would say constant innovation and knowledge sharing. And I think some of the platforms that we manage, like the PMR or CPLC, are platforms to exactly facilitate that process.
Thank you. Monty.
I think, to me, we need to see the potential of private fund, which is very huge. So I think the challenge for us is how to tap this fund, and then I think it's going to be at least two major issues. The first one, how do we develop the quality of the project, the green project preparation? I think one. The second thing is that how do we enhance the regulatory framework in which so it's going to be friendly climate investment for climate financing project, right? Thanks.
Thank you. Kentaro.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one just key message is it is important to empower the potential actors who have a decisive impact on this transition. So how we saw a lot of lack of information, the knowledge. So there are still kind of a lack of confidence. So get them involved or engaged fully, then give them more kind of confidence in taking more robust action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Without taking adaptation, mitigation, sustainable development into account, there will be no sustainable economic future. Therefore, we are at the mainstream, even if we don't recognize it all the time. Thank you very much. Give a hand to my panelists here, and thank you for being interested in this session. Thank you.